Welcome into the Old Man of the Three Things with JJ Redick and Tim Legler. Another Monday to talk NBA hoops. Legs, before we get to the NBA and before we get to the in-season tournament and Anthony Davis's dominant performance, I've just got to give a quick shout out. I am a dad, and I want to give a shout out to my son, Knox.
Let's do it.
We had a game yesterday. Really tough team. Probably the best competition we've faced all season. They started out in a 1-3-1, and I've been on him. About youth basketball zones. It's not real defense. That's what I keep telling him, right? It's just fluff. These kids are taught to guard an area. So when you're in their area, they actually don't know how to play man-to-man defense. Game started, and he just dissected this zone with his shooting, his drives, his passing. It was the most dominant he's played. The best first half of basketball. We ended up winning 37-35. It was a great game. Our kids executed down the stretch. He had a clutch Euro step bucket at the end, but it was his best game he's ever had. And I'm proud of him. Growth, man. You coached youth basketball. Watching growth from your players is just so fun.
And look, you're speaking. First of all, tremendous. Congrats, Knox. That's amazing. And as a guy you're talking to that coached his own son for years in that level of basketball, really started out when he was like 9 or 10 was the first time I took over a team that he was on. And so, yeah, you're obviously you're invested in the team and their team success, but the reason you're there is right because you're little guys on that team. And so when you see them have moments like that, where you know that like some little part of their pristine little hard drive that they have you embedded something in there that was allowing him to process what to do sort of like on his own and figure that out. There's just no better feeling in the world, man. It's the most rewarding thing ever because you get to do it together. It's something you both love, right? And it's the greatest, man. So I'm happy for both of you.
Thank you. And then a shout out to Chase and Benji and Dylan, who all had big games for me as well. Big win for us. Let's get to Saturday night's championship game, in-season tournament. Lakers beat the Pacers. Anthony Davis with just an absolute dominant performance, 41 points, 20 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 blocks. Again, these stats do not count towards the regular season, but just some context here. The last Laker to put up 40 points, 20 rebounds, 5 assists in a game was Wilt Chamberlain in 1971. That's how good Anthony Davis's game was the other night. We had talked prior to the regular season starting on one of these episodes about the best version of Anthony Davis and what that would mean to the Lakers. I wanted now at the quarter mark to sort of assess Anthony Davis and sort of assess the Lakers coming off this in-season tournament championship and your overall thoughts on both of them, the Lakers and Anthony Davis's play so far.
Well, first, let me just talk about AD leading up to Saturday night because, watching him throughout this, starting with the quarterfinal game, I was so impressed with his intent every trip. And what I mean by that is what differentiates the Lakers from other teams. Whenever you look at a matchup with the Lakers and you're going to say, okay, what advantages do the Lakers have? What advantages do the other teams have? You start with the size and power and skill level of their two best players, right? LeBron and AD, with just their sheer mass and size and skill level and the way they can play in tight spaces and in the paint and just differentiate themselves from everybody else, right? That's what separates the Lakers from other teams. So watching AD in the last 3 games, I'm used to seeing AD sometimes in a regular season be at the 3-point line or say at 18 feet and a shot is taken on the opposite side of the floor from the 3 and he starts jogging back or he kind of stays in one spot and then heads back after the other team secures a defensive rebound. The intent that he had to rim run on every shot and impose himself in the paint, whether he got it or not, and he had multiple efforts at times where he was getting multiple offensive rebounds or multiple tips or just running in there and having 2 guys occupy themselves to keep him off the glass, which enabled opportunities for other people to come in and get them a second possession. I just thought his consistent effort and purposefulness was so impressive. And look, we know when he does that, JJ, he's just different. There's not a real answer for somebody like Anthony Davis defensively. Schematically, from a personnel standpoint, you just don't have what it takes to deal with him when he is playing with that level of force. And I thought it was really the entire last 3 games. I didn't see every second of all of their 4 in-season tournament games in their pool play. But certainly starting with the quarterfinals, you're watching every minute of those games. And he is the difference between the Lakers being a team that's okay, good team, probably not going to be on the level of a Denver or a Milwaukee or Boston, and being a team that you could actually legitimately make a case for could win a title. That's the Anthony Davis we just saw throughout. Certainly that's the one we saw on Saturday night when it was just completely overwhelming for the Indiana Pacers front line to deal with Anthony Davis. When you watch that, you start to realize, you can't really make judgments on the Lakers in the regular season when they have these weird nights where they don't look all that interested. This is a team built for the playoffs, and specifically Anthony Davis. That's when he's going to make his impact felt. And can he do it consistently? It's always been the question. When he does, you see what that looks like on Saturday night.
A few things there. First of all, I love that assessment of the Lakers in terms of what their advantage is. It's such a smart way to put it. Their advantage is the fact that LeBron James and Anthony Davis are bigger and more skilled than 99% of NBA players. I mean, that's just the reality. It is that size, and it is that skill, it is that power, it is that strength. That's what gives them an advantage. You bring up them as a championship team and not necessarily or a playoff team and not necessarily a regular season team. They're 14-9 right now. I think they're 2 games in the loss column out of second place in the Western Conference. This to me is a big week for them, where I think now that we're at the quarter mark, some teams are going to start to separate. Maybe not the first and the second seed, but certainly the second and the third seed from the 7th and the 8th seed. They've got the Mavs tomorrow night, big game. And then they've got 2 games in San Antonio, back-to-back. Wednesday night in San Antonio, Friday night in San Antonio. That game will be on ESPN. I'll be calling that game. And so this is a week where they have a chance to be 17-9 going into the week before Christmas. That would be huge to me, given how poorly they have shot the basketball. I want to provide a little bit of color on that championship game against the Pacers. The Pacers right now are selling out to defending the three-point line. And they have not been a good defensive team, but I will give them credit. I thought the quarterfinal game, the semifinal game, and the championship game were the 3 best defensive games they've had this season. Yeah, and it's not about the counting numbers. Zach and I talked about this on his podcast. Zach Lowe and I talked about this on the podcast. To me, it's the effort. To me, it's the rotation. Look, they're not fundamentally built outside of Miles Turner maybe, and at times Bruce Brown, who oftentimes is undersized on his matchups. They don't have a ton of big defenders, right? So I thought the effort was great. Here's the thing, though. They sell out to the three-point line. This was a perfect game for Anthony Davis. Lakers only took 13 three-point shots, and that's part of the Indiana defensive strategy. Anthony Davis had 32 paint points. All of his made field goals were in the paint. I mean, he ate consistently at the rim. And so some of that dominance was because of that strategy. Miles Turner just had no answer for him. And again, it goes back to your thing. He's too big. He's too skilled. He's too strong. So I think that leads me into some of the criticism at times, some of the questioning around his consistency. And I thought Zach Lowe on Friday in his column for ESPN put it perfectly. I'm quoting Zach here. The lost jumper is the difference. The reason Davis can't score like Jokic or Embiid every night. The lost jumper is the difference. He's shooting 21% on long twos. He's 3 of 13 from 3 this season. He shot 47% on jumpers in the playoffs in the 2020 bubble. He shot 37% on jumpers since then. So if you want to point to the inconsistencies in terms of the scoring night to night, it's very simple. He's not a good jump shooter. He's not going to consistently make that shot. Now, You have one other person outside of those two guys, Embiid and Jokic, that I would sort of throw into this mix of these highly skilled bigs, and that's Giannis. Giannis, to me, is sort of the outlier here in that he is the modern-day Shaq. He leads the league in paint points. He scores 20 points a game in the paint. He's going to bully his way consistently over and over again into the paint. And so, and by the way, even though the Bucks, like, we can talk about their struggles, all whatever, they have the spacing, they have the shooting around him that he's going to get there. This to me is the Lakers' problem right now. They cannot shoot the basketball. And we got it right here. 30th in three-pointers made, 26th in three-point percentage, 29th in three-point attempts. They've been an average half-court basketball team since the bubble. 19th last year. They're 15th this year. To me, when we talk about the playoffs, and we're going to touch on this next week or in a couple weeks on the old man of the three, to me, in the playoffs now, in the modern NBA, you have to be able to score in the half court. And so my question to you is, because there's a lot of buzz now about maybe Zach LaVine, right? My question to you is this going to be something the Lakers have to improve internally, whether that's a healthy Gabe Vincent or Austin Reeves shooting the ball better? Or if you're the Lakers, do you go out and get shooting versus another star player to complement LeBron and AD?
Yeah, I think I would focus on the latter. I think I would go get shooting. You've got two guys that are going to separate themselves in every matchup they have. Like when you look at Anthony Davis and LeBron James, assuming that Anthony Davis is playing as hard as he was throughout this tournament, you have two guys that at no point defensively against them is there an advantage that you have. So think about how many teams in the league can actually say that. They've got two guys that win on paper every matchup in front of them. And so when you start from that point, and then you've got, a guy like D'Angelo Russell, who on a given night, he can be a 20-plus point scorer when you need to. Austin Reeves has shown that he can do that and also take on a lot of the playmaking responsibility. So you have enough initiators, and I think high-level offensive players, that now you need to get guys that maybe specialize a little bit more. Because like 34, 35%, 32%, that's not going to get it done from those spots. You need guys that when they're getting these open looks, and with LeBron and AD on the floor, these looks are pretty clean. This has to be a shot that's made at a much higher clip. And you've got to focus on getting that. Now, can you internally improve that? I think that's a difficult thing to do. You kind of are who you are from the three-point line. Now, Austin Reeves had a very poor start to the season. And I don't know why that was. For whatever reason, maybe he was putting too much pressure on himself because he got the contract. He kind of snuck up on people last year. He became a story. He played so well throughout the postseason. Now you get some money. And I think he was just pressing. He's been significantly better here over the last 10, 12 games, right? So now his three-point shooting, you expect now to be something that's going to be where it's at now the rest of the season. It's not enough. I agree with you. It's too spotty and too iffy on a given night. It didn't matter against the Pacers because you could overwhelm them physically with these matchups that you had inside the three-point line. Didn't matter against them. It's going to matter against some of the bigger teams. The Pacers, basically, you look at their lineup, JJ, they're not even as big as a lot of starting lineups in Power 5 conferences. I mean, that's literally the team that they're rolling out there. It's four guards for the most part. Three guards, Obi Toppin and Miles Turner.
Yeah, Obi's playing a lot of center right now with Jalen Smith being hurt over the last week, 10 days, however long it's been. Obi's been playing a lot of center. So You're right. They're completely undersized at a lot of positions.
That won't be the case when you play when you play a Milwaukee. That's where you end up in the NBA Finals, right? You get a team like that. You get a team like Denver. That's different. It's bigger. It's more physical. They can beat you also playing that internal game. So yeah, I think that they're going to have to certainly improve their shooting. I think what I want to see now going forward here is there going to be a hangover from this for Anthony Davis? Is there going to be a hangover for the Lakers a little bit? Because now, okay, this was great. And this created what the league wanted to create, a sense of purpose and a little bit more urgency for some of these regular season games here early in the year. But now what happens? You still got a couple months till the All-Star break. And then after that, we know it's a sprint. Right now, teams are really starting to get their ducks in a row and get ready for the postseason. But what about this 2-month stretch coming up? Is there a hangover at all where we start to see some of these, inconsistent nights and we question them again? Or are we going to have what we just saw over the last, 7 games for the Lakers indelibly etched in our minds? And we're going to remember, no, I don't care. I don't care what happened on a game against, whoever in Memphis in, January 8th on a Wednesday night. And the Lakers look like they mailed it in. I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to think about what happened in this in-season tournament. I'm curious to see that because we have a couple months stretch here, the dog days of the season.
Yep.
For a team like the Lakers, we might still see some more of this inconsistency out of AD. Obviously, the three-point shooting, that's not going to change much, I don't think, between now and the trading deadline probably. So I'm curious to see what our reaction is going to be or overreaction to what we see out of the Lakers over the next couple of months. Because right now, I think everybody would agree what we just saw, that's a team that could potentially win the whole thing. And I'm curious if we maintain that throughout what we're about to see over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I want to touch on the thing you said about specialists, because I think it's also important to note Vanderbilt getting back into the lineup, hasn't played a ton this year because of injury. He's a specialist, and he's a non-shooter. And I think when you get in the playoffs, depending on matchups, if your roster, if the foundation of that is 2 elite players, some functioning two-way players, and then specialists, night to night, matchup to matchup, series to series, it gives you a lot of flexibility. Mm-hmm. And so for me, they have that defensive specialist. They need a shooting specialist. And a guy, obviously we're going to monitor this. December 15th is right around the corner. A bunch of contracts can start being traded, leading 2 months into the deadline. We're going to talk about a ton of this stuff. The guy's name that gets thrown out all the time is Bogdanovich from Detroit, which leads me in to the Detroit Pistons. Our second topic.
Perfect segue.
I want to be somewhat quick on this. Because I do want to get to our third topic because I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. The Detroit Pistons and the San Antonio Spurs. Right now, Detroit 2-20. They've lost 19 in a row. San Antonio 3-18. They've lost 16 in a row. Unquestionably, these are 2 very bad basketball teams. As you assess these teams, as you think about where these teams are at potentially in the life cycle of an NBA franchise, for both these teams, how would you approach the rest of the season going forward?
It's interesting here. I think there's 2 totally different mindsets with each franchise. Now, first of all, let's put this all in context right now. What you're looking at with the Pistons, let's start there. JJ, they're on pace right now to win 7 games. 7. And they're very young. They've got some high draft picks here at the guard spot that they've used here the last couple of drafts. They're trying to win. Like they want to compete every night and win. And here's what's interesting for them and why you think, wow, there's no way they're going to come close to the all-time record of 9-73. They're not going to do that. Like it's early. At some point they'll win 3 games in a row, and they'll be comfortable that they're not going to have this embarrassment of being the worst team of all time. Here's why I think it's scary for them that they could get into that territory. The high-powered nature of these offenses, even the mediocre to below mediocre teams in this league can get to 120, 125 on a given night because of all of the three-point shooting, the spacing, and there's just more highly skilled shot makers in this league than there's ever been. So when you're a team like Detroit, like you're not going to run into these 92, 88 games as you and I talked about before. You're not going to get that, and then you're going to squeak a few of those out. No, this is different, man. Your average point differential is -10, so you are not competitive in a lot of these games in the fourth quarter because you can't keep teams into even 108, 110 where you have a chance. You've got to get to 120, 125. Like a lot of nights, that's where you have to be, and that's why. And also just the demoralizing nature of losing. Yeah. And the mentality of young players and like the seriousness with which you show up at the arena every day for your film session, your weight work. And like what you're thinking about and feeling about yourself as this game is about to start. It's more than just, hey, guys are young, go out, get your feet wet, improve as players. No, there's a whole nother layer to losing that permeates a locker room and a mentality and what it does to guys' psyche and their soul as a basketball player. When you're trying to win, like they're trying to compete. San Antonio's a little different, and Greg Popovich, it looks to me like he's just completely relaxed and comfortable, not caring about wins and losses at all. Their entire season hinges on the development of Victor Wembanyama. They have a marquee attraction, at least. Detroit, I can't really say that about. And that keeps the fan base sort of in it and energized. Everybody knows this is a much bigger picture situation for the Spurs because of the unique talent of Wembanyama. So even while they're losing, there's this buoyancy that we know what's coming. I don't know that the Pistons feel that way. Like, how do you feel that way? Looking at their roster, do you feel like you've got that guy? I don't know that we know that. So I think they're different situations mentally, different approach to what they're trying to do, but both of them, potentially going into, NBA infamy here if this continues much longer. And I'm more concerned about it for the Pistons than I am for the Spurs.
Yeah. You bring up the losing and you bring up the psyche around that and how demoralizing it can be. And the reason I asked the question is because I'm sort of looking at both these teams, and they're different. You're spot on. Detroit's rebuilding phase has gone on much longer than the Spurs. The Spurs, while they have been in a rebuilding phase for a couple of years, they at least have, I think, hit a home run, right? They got the number one pick. They got Wembanyama. The reason I asked the question is because my thinking around both these teams really is like, how do we create a sense of purpose? As a player, how do you create a sense of purpose for the rest of the season? As a coach, how do you create a sense of purpose? How do you, amidst this losing streak and amidst really bad basketball, I'm going to get into some numbers in a second, how do you create good habits? How do you not get into a situation where you are building bad habits and that delays progress for the future? That really, to me, is the challenge for both these teams to some degree. With Detroit, you touched on them not necessarily, we don't know necessarily if they have the guy, right? We don't know if Cade is the guy. In fairness to him, when you watch them play, the roster around him is not a good fit. He's not a blow-by guy, but he can get by his defender. He's a pick-and-roll operator. He's a big guard, but you watch him in ISO. You watch him in a pick-and-roll. There is not just a second defender, Tim. There is a third defender at all times. So I think some of the inefficiency with Cade and some of the ups and downs, like, I'm willing to take it with a grain of salt because of the roster around him. They're 28th in three-pointers made, 28th in three-point attempts, 27th three-point percentage. They've got the 28th best offense, the 24th best defense. They're 29th net. You brought up their minus 10 net rating. Hey, the Spurs are 30th, minus 11.8. The Spurs have been an awful basketball team too. I don't necessarily agree with the strategy. I'm not going to question Pop here. I'm not questioning Pop. I'm just going to say I don't necessarily agree with the strategy of consistently playing Jeremy Sohan at the point. I also think at times there's a lot of experimenting. I think at times, and Pop has admitted this, there's a hands-off approach to Wembanyama in terms of like, we're just going to see what he can do versus like, this is what we want you to do. So the structure and not the organization in terms of the organization, the franchise, but the organization on the basketball court. I think for me, watching them play, that has what has been frustrating, has led a lot. Like, there's a lot to be desired there in terms of the organization, the structure, building a system around Wemby. I haven't seen that. That's the frustrating part for me. On one last thing on Detroit is just like, again, context always matters. Two of the guys that are playing a ton of minutes for them are rookies, Thompson and Sasser. Thompson's a minus 13 net. Sasser's a minus 10.4. Isaiah Livers, another young player shooting decently, in terms of a low volume, but shooting 42% from three. He's been in the rotation. He's a minus 27. So you have a lot of young guards, young wings around Cade, and these guys are figuring it out in real time. And I just question the purpose. Like, what if you're Monty Williams, if you're Troy Weaver, how do you create purpose for the rest of this season?
Listen, and I was on a couple teams that, were lottery bound teams in the NBA. And I can just tell you, like, you get to mid-season, it's very difficult to keep everybody in that locker room as focused as they need to be, as connected as they need to be. And these are young guys. I'm not saying you got a fractured locker room or anything like that. It's just very tough when you wake up. Here we are in mid-December, and you wake up and you've got 60 games left to play. You've won 2. You've got a 16-game losing streak. Are you in the state of readiness that you need to be in when you leave your apartment, when you leave your house to go down to the arena for the work that you've got to put in that day? Because this, we're two former professional athletes. You're still coaching your son. I coached. The level of competitiveness, like, that's what drives us, and it has since we were little kids. And it's the same thing about every single guy in the league. And you have to feel like you're in the fight, and to keep that adrenaline pumping. And that's what you worry about with some of these young guys. My last point on this. The one thing I'll say about, you were right about Cade and who he's playing with. We don't know yet. And that's why I said we don't know if they have the guy.
Right.
But the one thing I will say is, like, in the case of San Antonio, Wembanyama, like, you have to have a guy, if you're in this state, where they're different. Something on your roster is different.
Yep.
And whether it's physical attributes and dimensions, whether it's a certain skill set, right? You have to know you've got somebody that you're building around that is different, that is unique, that is special in one of those areas. And clearly Wembanyama is because of his size and his skill level and what that could translate into eventually. I don't know that I see that in the case of anybody on Detroit's roster, like special vision, special physical dimension, special scoring ability. It's some nice young players. Yeah. We just don't know. Yeah. And that's why that organization and the state they're in, I think, is a little bit more perilous than what we're obviously seeing in San Antonio because of what the upside of Wembanyama could turn into.
Oh, yeah. One last thing, and I want to get to our third topic. Couple weeks ago, we highlighted Jaquez Jr. I called him the third best rookie this year at the time. Since that, nothing I've seen from any rookie has changed my opinion of that. Okay. Jaquez Jr. is still the third best rookie to me. But I got a lot of flack for that. Can we not do the whataboutism? Can we just acknowledge someone and say, hey, this guy's playing really well? I get Dallas fans. I get it. Lively's been really good. I've talked about how good Lively's been. Thompson's been really good. I've talked about how Thompson is fun. I don't know that he's a tier 1 Batman, but he's awesome. And he's going to have a long career. And defensively, his impact is awesome. He also plays on a 2-20 team. I can't have him as the third best rookie. I'm sorry. His team sucks. Jaquez Jr. is actually impacting winning. Okay? We factor all this stuff in when we talk about players. Okay? I'm not just looking at, this guy's averaging a 10 rebounds. Great. That's great. Okay? The difference and why I have Wembanyama in the top 3 is because he does shit that I've never fucking seen before. And he's playing in a disorganized chaos at times. Like, I watched a game the other night, and I turned on the game. It's a nationally televised game. And not knocking these guys. They're fine role players. And Zach Collins, I'm so happy he's healthy and playing well. Chetty Osman, somebody I competed against, tough guy, can shoot it. But I'm watching this, and I'm like, why am I watching Chetty Osman and Zach Collins' 2-man game with Wembanyama on the floor? Why? Why am I watching that?
All right. Well, I can answer that if you want real quick. And this is what I've been saying from the beginning. The very first night, the very first time I saw Wembanyama play this year, I said, Greg Popovich is clearly, he's going so far the other way to deflect any sort of pressure or responsibility on Victor Wembanyama. Like, we're just going to let him be out there and play. We're not going to come up and make him the focal point where we're running stuff geared toward him. If you watch Wembanyama play, it's kind of amazing, actually, statistically, he's done what he has, because it's all sort of just floating around.
Yeah.
And he just still makes things happen because of this incredible length and skill that he has. But it's not like they're doing anything where coming up the floor, there's a purpose behind what they're doing to make sure he gets the ball in a spot he can operate. It happens sometimes organically, but they're doing everything organizationally to protect him so he doesn't feel too much pressure where he's getting overly scrutinized. And I think that's what you're talking about. And it really hasn't changed much here 20 games into the season. It's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah.
There's some other rookies that go into these losing teams, and like the fan base like wants that guy to be like that. So the organization kind of forces that on them. And I think the Spurs are doing everything the opposite. And they just know this is an absolute long play with him. It's a long-term project. And let's see where we are in 3-4 years from now if he has turned into this, franchise-type generational talent that can elevate everybody around him. In the meantime, we're not going to do anything where your focus is on Victor Wembanyama when he comes up the floor and what we're about to do for him and what we're going to run for him. And I think it's an intent on the part of the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah. One last rookie I just want to mention, and that's Brandon Miller, who has played really, really solid as of late. And I know you'll be with us on Christmas for the Monday Old Man and the Three Things. You and I are going to basically do a preview and talk about all 8 teams playing on Christmas Day. That'll be a fun one. Next week with the Dunker Spot guys, I do want to spend some time on Brandon Miller because I've been really impressed with how he's played over the last 7 or 8 games. Let's get to our third topic real quick, and that is an unheralded impact player, somebody that maybe we're not giving enough love to, who's impacting winning, playing on a good basketball team. I'm going to start with you, actually. Who is your unheralded impact player so far at the quarter mark?
Yeah, I love the way that this is worded. Unheralded impact player. Doesn't mean that this is a player that had to come kind of out of nowhere, right? And now all of a sudden he's in a rotation on a good team. How about a guy that's been around a long time, but because of some other guys on his roster is not getting any credit for their 17-4 start? I'm going to go with Mike Conley.
I love it. Great one.
Who's been one of my favorite players since the day he came into the league. I just love his professionalism. I love how hard he plays defensively. I love how smart he is. He's a big game player. When you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, obviously most of the attention is going to go toward Anthony Edwards, who's this emerging star, potentially a superstar type talent. And now the winning is actually coinciding with it. So now you're really starting to buy in to Anthony Edwards' impact and ultimately what his ceiling could be. And it got Karl Anthony Towns, who's been an all-star, who's put up huge numbers for Minnesota before. You've got Rudy Gobert, who's going to be a Hall of Famer, who has transformed them defensively. Right? You've got all these guys. McDaniel guarding everybody all over the floor, getting a lot of attention for that. And then you've got this guy at the point who is playing roughly 30 minutes a night, and he's turning the ball over one time per night. Mike Conley turns the ball over. And here's why it's so important. The organization, when a team is trying to get to that next level where you take them seriously, we know defensively they're significantly better. But if you just had Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns sort of doing their own thing offensively, I don't think this team is close to 17-4. You need organization and the security that Mike Conley provides when that ball's coming up the floor and the way he directs traffic. His IQ, he's the CPU of the team. He is the central processor. He's the guy that's looking at everything, getting the floor balanced, making sure that Anthony Edwards is going to start somewhere and receive the ball in a position where now it's advantageous for him, where he's going to attack from in a 2-man game or an iso, whatever it may be. He's the guy, Mike Conley, that's going to make sure Karl Anthony Towns is where he needs to be at the start of a set so he catches it with maximum efficiency. The way he manages a team, it's so subtle. It's so understated. He's been around a long time. And he's gotten a lot of accolades. He was on really good teams in Memphis. I just don't think Mike Conley's name has been mentioned once all year with the impact of success on the Minnesota Timberwolves. And that's why I wanted to give him a shout out right now. They're not where they are without Mike Conley as that stabilizing force at the point guard position.
All of the praise that Mike Conley has gotten, I think has come from internal people in the Wolves organization, whether that's been Chris Finch, different players. They've talked about how he essentially has been the difference maker since being traded there last year. And he played really well last year. But you think about this, Tim, and I know I got traded twice in season. It's hard when you get traded in season to figure things out on the fly.
Yeah.
He's had, last year, the first round of the playoffs, and then an off season, the preseason. Like, to me, he's figured out sort of the perfect role for himself. And he, with all the sort of spacing issues and, whether it's like, why aren't we as good defensively when we have Gobert on the, well, they've figured all that out now. And he sort of has made this whole thing work. Anthony Edwards is going to be their highest usage player. To me, at this stage in Mike Conley's career, he's almost the perfect complement to Anthony Edwards.
Great point.
Because of his ability to space. He's not going to be a high volume creator anymore in his career. So there's no ego there in terms of batting with a high usage guard in Anthony Edwards. He is like the perfect complement to Anthony Edwards, and he's been phenomenal. And I love that you shouted him out. I'm going a different direction here. My unheralded impact player, the guy that I don't think is getting enough buzz and love right now, is actually Joel Embiid. It's actually Joel Embiid, the reigning MVP. Because every time we talk about the Philadelphia 76ers, it's always about Maxey. It's always about Nick Nurse. It's always about these role players. We always have to bring up James Harden. And we just kind of take it for granted. Oh, Joel Embiid's there, right? Joel Embiid is having arguably his best season of his career this year, coming off an MVP, coming off multiple top twos in the MVP race. And you think about, I brought this up on Friday when I was doing some studio stuff for ESPN, and you think about the conversation around Jokic and Embiid. So much of this conversation was around advanced stats and how Jokic had this massive advantage in advanced stats. And a lot of voters and a lot of people that cover the NBA talk about this. We are starting to normalize some of these stats in our regular conversations around the NBA. I know I use them, and I usually try to take opportunities to explain them. Right?
Yeah. They're important. Yeah.
The margin now for Joel Embiid and Jokic or any other player, really, because there's a bunch of guys, and there's really 4 guys that have really stood out in a lot of these advanced stats, specifically the offensive stats. The margin is just so slim now. And Embiid actually right now has the highest player efficiency rating in NBA history. He just overtook Jokic. Jokic had those 2 off-shooting nights. Joel Embiid is averaging a career high. He's on pace to win his 3rd straight scoring title. He's averaging a career high in assists. And you think about some of the advantages in these conversations around Jokic, like, well, Jokic is the hub of the offense. Well, guess what? Joel Embiid has now become the hub of the offense. With no James Harden. He is the hub of the offense. He is the playmaker. I want to run through these real quick. It is fascinating because I looked at all this stuff. Oh, by the way, one thing before I get to the advanced stats. He's also one of the smartest players ever. And I mean that. I'm serious. The ability to draw fouls is such a skill. And we can show the clips on Twitter all we want. We complain all we want. This is what makes guys so hard to guard now. You don't realize how much tape that a James Harden watched in his career, or how much tape of Joel Embiid watched in his career, how much tape a guy like Anthony Edwards is watching right now. Okay, when I make this move, where is the defender's hands? They know where the hands are at all times. He's averaging a career high in free throw attempts, and he's shooting a career high 87.5%.
Hey, and real quick, I just want to, before you finish up, I want to just tag that point, because here's something else people need to understand.
Yeah.
The impact that a player has when he draws that many fouls and he puts teams in foul trouble, basically by himself, gets his team into the bonus. You know what that means for Tyrese Maxey? One of the quickest guys in the league. You can't touch him now. because you're in the bonus early in quarters because of what Joel Embiid just did single-handedly. So the impact permeates other players on the roster. With your ability to put your team in the penalty that quickly, it makes guys like Maxey, who are so lightning fast on the perimeter, basically unguardable at times because you got 6 minutes left to play in this quarter, and any contact means 2 free throws. So I just wanted to point that out because sometimes people just think it's all about Embiid's free throw attempts. Yeah. That permeates the entire roster.
Yeah. It's a great point. And for all the people who complain about the Lakers getting a ton of free throws, it's the same point for the Lakers. Anthony Davis and LeBron James are going to put so much pressure on the rim. That's the reason the Lakers lead the league in free throw attempts, and there's such a disparity between their free throw attempts and opponent free throw attempts. They are drawing fouls. I think about when I played with Joel Embiid, the way Brett Brown had my rotations for those 2 years, I would generally play the first 6 or 7 minutes of the first quarter. I would then sit out about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'd come back in the last, call it 2.5, 3 minutes, whatever the under 3 minute timeout was. I come back in. Guess what? Every single time that I came back in, we were in the bonus because Joel Embiid had got us there. And so when I came back in, guess what? If you put your hands on me when I'm coming off a screen, I'm figuring out a way to get fouled. 2 free throws. There you go.
So true.
There you go. I was always cognizant of that playing with Joel, his ability to get us to the bonus. Real quick. So Joel Embiid right now, I mentioned the player efficiency rating. He's 3rd in win shares, Jokic and Shea. 4th in offensive win shares, Hallie, Jokic, Shea. 2nd in win shares per 48, Shea's number 1. 2nd in box plus minus, Jokic number 1. 3rd in offensive box plus minus, Hallie and Jokic 1 and 2 there. 7th in defensive box plus minus for all you Jokic haters. Jokic is number 1 there. 3rd in value over replacement player, Jokic and Shea 1 and 2 there. I mean, when you think about it, like you say, who's having the best season in the NBA? It's like 4 guys. It's like really 4 guys. And Joel Embiid is one of them, and we've taken it for granted. We've taken it for granted. I go back to something he said in preseason, which is essentially, we still have a chance to win because I'm here. And I saw the quote. I reacted to it. I talked about it at the time. He's right. They have a chance to win every single night because he's simply one of the 1 or 2 best players in the world. That's how I look at Joel Embiid right now in his career.
And there's no debating anything around what you just said. And here's the final point, and this really has put a lot of juice in Sixers fans right now, and they need it because of what just happened to the Eagles the last 2 games. Sixers fans right now are feeling this sense of hope because the other thing is Joel Embiid feels right now. He feels a different sense of joy, I think, to play because I think he's looking at the guy next to him, and I just think he's got such confidence in Tyrese Maxey, not just in how he's playing right now in the regular season and his emergence. It's also, I think, Joel Embiid looking down the road. I think Joel Embiid has more faith that when they get into these difficult series, and they're going to have several, and potentially they got to get through Boston and Milwaukee, maybe if that's how it lines up, you're going to make sure that guy is there. And he's able to operate the same way he did in the regular season against those teams in a best of 7. I think Joel Embiid, because of that, he's got a nice little bounce in his step. He looks incredibly happy right now. Like the game is fun for Joel Embiid. There's no burden there. And the talent is unquestioned. The question's always going to be what's going to happen at the end of this journey when you get into April, May, and June. And I think for me, I have more belief in this Sixers team right now than I have in the last couple.
Yeah, and my hope, my sincere hope, and obviously I love Joel, friend. My sincere hope, though, is he's healthy, number one, because he's had a bunch of playoff injuries.
True.
He's healthy. He dominates. The Sixers make a run, and we can stop all the fucking noise around Joel Embiid and his playoff performance because it's annoying.
Amen.
I'm not saying it's not based in fact. I'm not saying that.
No,
but it's annoying. It discredits his greatness. And the context around a lot of I played with him and he was injured 2 of the years that I, the 2 years I played with him. He's had a knee injury. He's had, I think, 2 knee injuries during the playoffs since I left. Like he's been hurt a lot of times in the playoffs. So my hope is that he's healthy. He dominates. Sixers make a run. We can stop all this noise about Joel Embiid in the playoffs. I'd love that. All right, Tim, always fun chopping it up with you.
Yeah, man.
This has been another episode of The Old Man and the Three Things with JJ Redick and Tim Legler.